They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the one who vowed to love you. Imagine being a doctor, dedicating every heartbeat to saving lives, only to have your own life torn apart in the very place you fight for others. In the middle of a chaotic night in the ER, my husband walked in, not with comfort, but with divorce papers. The man I had once trusted placed them in my hands while monitors screamed and nurses called my name. One moment, I was battling for Acacian's life. The next, I was forced to watch my own collapse. Within 30 days, the woman they all called abandoned would step out of a limousine as the wife of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. How did that happen? Why did the one who swore to stand beside me choose another? And how does a shattered woman rebuild when the world insists she is finished? Stay until the end, because this is not just a story about heartbreak. It's a story about survival, redemption, and the kind of twist you will not see coming. And if you believe every life has a turning point, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. The rain had started before dawn, tapping against the hospital windows like a relentless reminder of everything falling apart. I slipped into my scrubs, the fabrics still damp from rushing through the storm. My hands trembled only slightly as I tied my hair back, forcing my focus onto the patient waiting on the table. The ER smelled of antiseptic and desperation, a place I had called home for nearly a decade. But that night, the air carried something colder. Jason appeared in the doorway, his suit crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, as if he hadn't been living under the same collapsing roof as me. Without a word of comfort, he slid a stack of papers across the counter. Divorce. The word cut through the alarms sharper than any scalpel I had ever held. My voice broke. Now? Here? He didn't blink. His tone was steady, detached. I don't love you, Emily. I never did. Rachel understands me in ways you never could. Her name slipped from his mouth like a blade twisting deeper. A nurse shouted for me to clamp an artery, and I turned back to the patient, blood pulling fast, every second crucial. But my hands shook as his words echoed louder than the monitors. I begged him with my eyes, but Jason had already stepped back, his gaze fixed on Rachel, standing in the shadows of the hallway, her lips curled in a victorious smile. In that moment, I realized I could save a stranger's heartbeat, but not the marriage I had bled for. I signed his papers with the same pen I used to sign medical charts, a single stroke sealing the end of a life I thought was ours. The smell of oatmeal filled the hospital room, steam rising from the bowl in my hands as I sat beside Mrs. Miller. She had suffered a mild stroke, and I had promised myself that no matter how broken I felt, I would not abandon her. Spoon by spoon, I coaxed her to eat, whispering gently the way a daughter would, though my own heart was raw from the night before. Her lips tightened, reluctant, but finally she swallowed, muttering about how tasteless hospital food had become. I smiled faintly, wiping her chin with a napkin, telling her we would try something different tomorrow. For a moment, I almost believed she could still see me as family. Then the click of high heels shattered that fragile peace. Rachel swept in, her designer bag swinging, her voice sugar-sweet. She set down a glossy gift bag and announced it was Bird's Nest from overseas, each jar worth more than a week of my paycheck. Mrs. Miller's eyes lit up, and in an instant, the warmth I had tried to build was replaced by delight reserved for Rachel. "You shouldn't have," she said, voice trembling with gratitude. Rachel leaned closer, brushing Mrs. Miller's hand, her glance cutting toward me with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. I forced myself to thank her, though inside I felt the ground slipping. That evening, when I returned home, exhausted and still in scrubs, Jason's words struck me like cold rain. He looked me over and sneered, "Is this how you present yourself in public? You're supposed to be a doctor, Emily. Don't you care about appearances?"
My hands clenched at my sides as I tried to explain that I had been at the hospital all day, that I hadn't even had time to change. His eyes narrowed, his tone dripping with disdain. "You don't look like the wife of a man with ambition. You look like someone who doesn't belong at my side." My throat tightened as I reached for his hand, whispering that I wanted to make things work. He shook me off as though my touch burned. Later, alone in the bedroom, I clutched the old jacket he once gave me when we were newlyweds, the fabric worn thin but still carrying the ghost of hope. A text lit up my phone. Rachel's name glared on the screen. Her words were sharp in their false kindness. "If you love him, let him go. You're only holding 3 people hostage to a lie." I laughed bitterly, though tears blurred my vision. How cruel it is to save countless lives, yet fail to save the one life I had built with him. As midnight deepened, the rain outside tapped like fingers drumming against the window. I whispered to no one, asking why a wife could suddenly become an intruder in her own home. The silence answered me, heavy and unyielding, wrapping around me like a verdict. And I knew then that the woman Jason once called his partner was nothing more than a shadow he had already erased.
Monday morning at the hospital began like any other, the corridors buzzing with urgency, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air. I had just slipped into my white coat when a young nurse rushed toward me, her eyes wide with panic. She shoved a chart into my hands, her voice trembling. "Dr. Carter, the family from room 612 is raising hell. They claim you prescribed the wrong medication." My stomach dropped as I scanned the papers. The dosage scribbled across the page was dangerous, fatal for someone with high blood pressure. And worst of all, it carried my signature. I froze, staring at the ink that looked like mine but was not. "This isn't my handwriting," I whispered, though my voice felt lost in the hallway noise. Before I could steady myself, the clicking of heels echoed against the linoleum. Rachel appeared, arms folded, eyes gleaming with practiced pity. "Emily, you must have been exhausted last night. Mistakes happen, but in our field, they cost lives." Her words floated like poison, sweet to anyone listening, but sharp enough to carve me open. I turned on her, my pulse racing. "I didn't write this. I handed off the chart myself, and the nurse on duty signed it." She tilted her head, feigning concern, then looked to the crowd forming nearby. "Yet the family insists they saw your signature, and the patient nearly died. Are you saying they imagined it?" Gasps whispered through the bystanders. The nurse who had rushed to me now avoided my gaze, her silence as heavy as chains. At that moment, the hospital director stepped out from the administrative office. His suit was pressed, his expression stone. "Dr. Carter," he said firmly, "given the gravity of this incident, you are suspended effective immediately, pending internal investigation." His words echoed like a gavel in a courtroom. I opened my mouth to fight, but nothing came out. My throat burned, my hands trembled around the forged chart. I could hear the family sobbing down the hall, their grief turning into rage. "She almost killed our father," one voice shouted, and another, "This hospital protects no one." I stood rooted to the floor, the walls closing in, the sterile lights above blinding. Rachel's hand touched my shoulder lightly, the gesture mockingly intimate. "Emily, you must have been exhausted last night. Mistakes happen, but in our field, they cost lives." She smiled, soft enough to convince anyone else of her innocence, but I saw the curve of triumph at the corner of her lips, the victory she had been waiting for. As the crowd dispersed, whispers trailed behind me like smoke. Murderer, careless, unfit. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My badge, once a symbol of purpose, now felt like a brand of shame pinned to my chest. I slipped it off slowly, holding it in my palm, cold and heavy. That night, I returned to Mrs. Miller's room with a thermos of soup, my last tether to a life unraveling.
But when I opened the door, Rachel was already there, spooning broth to her lips, laughing with the woman who once called me daughter. I lingered in the doorway, unseen, as Mrs. Miller patted Rachel's hand and whispered, "You're the daughter-in-law I always hoped for." My knees buckled, my vision blurred, and I stumbled back into the hallway where the applause of nurses down the corridor reminded me not of respect, but of how easily reputations burn. I arrived at the house earlier than usual, the dawn still clinging to the windows, a small bag of groceries in my hand. I wanted to prepare something warm for Mrs. Miller's return, to remind her that despite everything, I was still here. But as I stepped through the gate, laughter floated out from inside. Through the open door, I saw Rachel carrying a basket of fruit, her voice light, playful. "Don't worry about the heat, Mom, I'll take care of it." And there she was, standing in the kitchen, already moving as if she belonged. Mrs. Miller leaned against the counter, smiling like she hadn't in months. I froze in the doorway, unsure if I should enter. A neighbor walking by paused, his brow furrowed. "Oh, Emily, you're still here? I thought you'd moved out. That young lady has been around a lot lately." His words cut deeper than any accusation. I swallowed hard, then pushed myself forward into the entryway. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, Mrs. Miller's face hardened. Her tone carried none of the warmth I had poured my days into. "Why are you here? I already have someone caring for me. You don't need to come around anymore." The bag slipped from my hand, apples rolling across the tile. I bent down, trying to gather them, but Rachel's shadow loomed above me. She crossed her arms, tilting her head with a smug smile. "Emily, maybe it's time you step back. People here are already used to the new rhythm. Holding on only makes it harder." The humiliation burned hotter than the summer sun outside. My hands shook as I stuffed the fruit back into the torn paper bag. I opened my mouth, desperate for a word that would prove my place, but nothing came. The silence finished the sentence I couldn't say. With each second, I felt myself erased, written out of a life I had built from scratch. I turned, stepping out into the yard where whispers rose from the neighbors gathered nearby. "That's the ex-wife. Poor thing, she lost everything." Another chuckled softly. "Well, maybe she was never enough for him." I held my head high, though my eyes blurred, forcing my feet to move, one after the other, until the gate clicked shut behind me. The sky darkened without warning, heavy clouds spilling rain as if the heavens themselves mocked me. I dragged my suitcase through the downpour, the old jacket clutched tight against my chest. At the bus stop, headlights split through the curtain of rain. Jason's car slowed to a halt, the tinted windows sliding down. He didn't step out. He didn't offer an umbrella. He only extended a damp sheet of paper through the opening. His signature already scrawled at the bottom. "This is it, Emily. All you need to do is sign." My hands trembled as water dripped from my hair, pooling onto the tile. "Jason, we're still husband and wife. Shouldn't we at least talk?" His smirk was colder than the storm. "I don't have time. Rachel knows what I need. You never did. Stop pretending this marriage was ever enough." My chest tightened. The world spun with the pounding rain. I gripped the pen, my voice barely audible. "If this is what you want," I pressed my name onto the soaked paper, the ink spreading, just like every promise we once made. Without another word, I turned away, dragging my suitcase into the storm, knowing that the home I had fought to protect was gone forever.
The rain had not stopped when my phone rang that night, the shrill tone cutting through the silence of my small rented room. I almost ignored it, convinced it was another cruel reminder of what I had lost. But the number flashing across the screen was from the hospital. My breath caught. Against every instinct telling me to let it go, I answered. A frantic voice on the other end pleaded, "Dr. Carter, we need you back. There's a critical patient. The lead surgeon is delayed. You're the only one who can step in." For a heartbeat, I hesitated, the sting of betrayal still raw. Yet, the moment I heard the word critical, my training took over. My jacket was soaked before I even locked the door behind me. The emergency ward was a blur of shouting voices and flashing monitors when I arrived. Nurses rushed at me with gloves, masks, and chats, their eyes wide. On the table lay a man, blood pooling at his side, his chest rising shallow and uneven. Someone whispered, "That's Alexander Hayes." The name struck the air like thunder. Even in my haze of exhaustion, I recognized it. The youngest CEO in Chicago's medical empire. A man whose face filled magazines, but whose life now dangled by a fragile thread. The chief surgeon's hands trembled as he stared at the torn muscle near the heart. He shook his head. "It's too deep. If I go further, we'll lose him." My eyes locked on the wound, every detail screaming for urgency. Without waiting, I stepped forward. "Let me take it!" Gasp rippled through the room. The chief hesitated, then gave a tight nod. The scalpel felt heavier than usual as it touched my palm. The world outside that room disappeared. I guided the sutures through shredded tissue, each stitch a desperate prayer. The monitor flatlined for a breathless second, and the silence crushed me. "No, stay with me," I whispered, sweat dripping beneath my mask. My fingers worked faster, steadier than my heart, weaving life back into a man I had never met. Then, faintly, the monitor blipped. Once, twice. A rhythm returned, slow but real. The room exhaled in unison. When it was over, I pulled the gloves from my hands, my arms heavy, my knees weak. The chief surgeon gripped my shoulder, his voice hushed. "You just saved a man the city cannot afford to lose." I didn't answer. All I saw was the faint rise and fall of his chest, proof that my choice to step back into this battlefield still mattered. Hours later, as I stood behind the glass of the recovery ward, Alexander's eyes flickered open. His lips moved weakly, forming words too soft to hear. A nurse leaned closer, then turned to me, astonished. "He asked who saved him." My reflection in the glass stared back pale and trembling, a woman stripped of home, love, and honor. Yet at that moment, to the man inside that room, I was the difference between silence and another heartbeat.
A month passed after that night in the operating room, but the memory of stitching life back into Alexander Hayes lingered like a brand on my hands. I tried to disappear into quiet shifts at a free clinic, keeping my head down while whispers of my suspension still floated through Chicago's medical circles. Then one morning, a black sedan pulled up outside the clinic, its driver stepping out with a single envelope. Inside was a card, embossed with the crest of Hayes Corporation. 3 words written in sharp ink: 10 o'clock, Tower 33. I told myself not to go, yet an hour later, I found myself stepping out of the elevator onto the top floor of a glass tower that overlooked the city. The office stretched like a cathedral of power, floor-to-ceiling windows spilling light across steel and leather. At the center sat Alexander, no longer the broken man on an operating table, but upright, composed, his gaze steady. "Dr. Carter," he began, his voice calm but deliberate, "I owe you my life, and I need something in return." He slid a folder across the glass desk. Inside was a marriage contract, the words cold and clinical. 3 months, he explained, long enough to assure my grandmother that I'm stable, that I've settled down. She's ill, and she wants to see me married before... His words trailed off, but his meaning was clear. "In return, I will erase the stain on your record, fund your mother's treatment, and place you back where you belong, in a hospital worthy of your skill." The audacity of it made my blood boil. "So you want me to play wife for hire," I said, forcing my voice to remain even.
He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. I want balance. You need redemption. I need peace. This is not love, Emily. It's survival. I pushed the folder back to him and stood. I won't sell myself to save my career. My words rang louder than I intended, but he didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, and he let me walk away without another word. That evening, the phone rang again, but this time it wasn't Alexander. It was the small-town hospital where my mother had been rushed hours earlier. Her blood pressure had spiked, scans revealed a mass in her brain, and the specialist demanded immediate payment before surgery could proceed. My knees buckled as I clutched the phone, realizing the little savings I had would barely cover a fraction. Moments later, another call came, a voice I recognized from the Hayes Tower, calm and precise. Mr. Hayes has already arranged for her care. All he asks is your signature. My throat closed, tears streaming unchecked as the world closed around me. 3 nights later, in the quiet halls of the Hayes estate, a ceremony unfolded. No guests, no music, only a grandmother smiling through fragile breaths, a lawyer reading clauses, and Alexander sliding a simple band onto my finger. There was no kiss, no warmth, just 2 strangers bound by circumstance. But when his hand brushed mine, steady and cold, I understood. This was not an ending. This was the start of another bargain with fate. The headlines came first. Glossy photos splashed across every news site. Alexander Hayes, the elusive CEO, was married, and beside him in those stolen images was me, a woman they thought they knew only as a disgraced doctor. The whispers spread fast, and with them came Rachel's fury. At the clinic, I was bent over a chart when her perfume hit before her voice. She strode in, heels sharp against the tile, her smile dripping with malice. So this is how you survive now, Emily, trading scrubs for a wealthy husband. The nurses froze, pretending to busy themselves, but their eyes darted toward us. I set the pen down, my hands trembling only slightly. You should leave, I said softly, though my chest burned. Rachel leaned closer, her whisper sharp. You may wear his ring, but we both know you're nothing without his name. Before I could answer, the door opened, and Alexander filled the frame. His gaze swept the room, icy and unyielding, landing on Rachel like a blade. That's enough. He stepped closer, his voice steady but carrying the weight of command. This woman is my wife. You will not speak to her like that again. The room stilled. Rachel's face paled, her smirk collapsing under the weight of his words. She turned, biting back whatever venom she had left, and stormed out without another glance. My breath caught in my throat. Alexander didn't linger, just adjusted his cuff and asked in a quieter tone, "Are you all right?" I nodded, though my heart pounded with a rhythm I couldn't control. Weeks later came the gala, a glittering ballroom filled with chandeliers and cameras. I had chosen a simple dress, understated, hoping to remain invisible. But Rachel was there, shimmering in red, her eyes trained on me like a predator. She approached with a glass of wine, her voice dripping honey. Your dress is lovely, though it seems delicate. Let me help fix it. And with one swift tug, I heard the fabric tear. Gasps rippled through the crowd, 100 eyes searing into my skin as the dress split at the seam. My legs froze, humiliation flooding my veins. The announcer's voice echoed, calling my name to the stage. I turned to flee, but before I could, Alexander appeared again. Without hesitation, he stripped off his black jacket and draped it over my shoulders. His hand found mine, firm and steady. "Walk with me," he murmured. The crowd parted as he led me to the podium, every step crushing the whispers beneath his presence. My voice shook at first, then steadied as I looked out at the sea of eyes. In medicine, none of us are invincible. We bleed, we falter, we even break. But when someone chooses to stand with us, we remember we are not alone. Applause rose louder than the shame, drowning Rachel's smirk in a tide she could not stop.
Jason found me first. It was late afternoon when I stepped out of the hospital, the echoes of the gala still haunting me. He stood there by the entrance, hands shoved into his pockets, his eyes searching mine with something I hadn't seen in years: regret. "Emily," he called softly, almost like the man I used to know. "Can we talk?" I froze. The memory of his signature on divorce papers still raw in my veins. "There's nothing left to say," I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. He stepped closer, desperation cracking through his mask. "I made a mistake. I shouldn't have let you go. You've changed. You're stronger now, but why do you have to look at me like I'm a stranger?" I held his gaze, cold and unyielding. "Because you are. You pushed me into the rain with nothing but a suitcase. Now you expect me to open the door you slammed shut?" His jaw clenched, anger flickering where regret had been. "Is it him? Hayes? That's the man who has your loyalty now?" I let a bitter smile curve across my lips. "He's the man I saved on an operating table. The man who respects what you never could. You crushed my heart, Jason. He's the one who still has his beating because I refuse to give up." For a moment, silence wrapped around us, the city humming in the distance. Jason looked away, shame and fury tangled in his expression. But in the shadows of that same city, Rachel watched, her eyes burning with jealousy. It didn't take long before their anger found each other. They met in a quiet cafe, conspiratorial whispers cutting through the clink of coffee cups. "She humiliated me in front of everyone," Rachel hissed. Jason leaned back, bitterness hardening his voice. "She looks down on me now, talks about Hayes as if I don't exist." Their resentment twisted into resolve. Rachel slid a folder across the table, the corners stained with old coffee. "Remember the patient who died 3 years ago? She was on duty that night. The report was buried. All we have to do is bring it back." Jason opened the file, eyes scanning the faded pages, the medical jargon bending into accusation. "There's no proof she caused it," he muttered. But Rachel's smile was sharp. "We don't need proof. We need doubt." Days later, the storm broke. Headlines exploded across social media. "Hero doctor" or "hidden killer." My name plastered beside grainy scans of old records, words twisted into daggers. Comment sections filled with questions that felt like knives. Could the woman who saved lives also have ended one? I sat in my office staring at the glowing screen, my hands trembling as if the old wound had been cut open all over again. And just when I thought I was standing tall again, the ground beneath me crumbled once more.
The headlines kept multiplying, each one sharper than the last. My name, my face, dragged through the dirt with a single question mark hanging over every sentence. Colleagues who once nodded respectfully in hospital corridors now looked away, their silence louder than any insult. I sat alone in my office, phone buzzing nonstop, but I didn't answer. Every notification was another reminder that my past had been turned into a weapon. That night, I slid my license into a drawer and told the dark I was done. It was Alexander who broke the silence. He stormed into the boardroom of Hayes Corporation, the weight of his authority filling every corner. Executives muttered about reputation. Investors warned about damage control. One of them finally spoke the words I dreaded most. "We should distance ourselves from her until this clears up." The air froze. Alexander set his pen down with a sharp crack against the table. His voice was calm, but it carried the edge of steel. "No one distances themselves from my wife. If anyone wants to walk away, do it now. But she stays, and we will uncover the truth." The investigation moved fast. Lawyers traced bank records, digital footprints, old reports long buried. Within days, the evidence surfaced like bones rising from shallow ground. Payments funneled into the account of a senior physician, the same man who once suspended me years ago. Transfers signed by Rachel's hand. Bribes exchanged for silence, for lies, for the stain on my name to never wash out. When the hospital board convened, I walked into that sterile chamber in my white coat,
the same one they had stripped from me before. Jason was there, eyes darting nervously, Rachel beside him, her smile brittle. The chairman cleared his throat. "Dr. Carter, this is your chance to respond." My voice did not shake. I laid out the documents one by one, the transfers, the testimony of a nurse who had finally found the courage to speak. Then I looked straight at the man who had once condemned me. "You buried me to protect yourself. You let me carry a death that wasn't mine." The room fell silent. The physician lowered his head, his voice cracking. "I took the money. I lied. I never thought it would go this far." Rachel paled, rage and fear clawing through her composure. Jason shifted in his chair, eyes burning with something between shame and disbelief. The chairman's gavel struck like thunder. "Effective immediately, this board clears Dr. Emily Carter of all allegations. The hospital issues a formal apology for the harm done." My chest tightened, the weight of years lifting all at once. Cameras flashed as the decision was read, but I only heard the quiet voice inside me whispering that the truth had finally spoken louder than the lies.
The board's verdict spread quickly, but I didn't celebrate. I walked out of that room with my coat still clinging to my shoulders, not as a symbol of victory, but of survival. The cameras outside flashed like lightning, reporters shouting questions I didn't bother to answer. What mattered was the silence that followed me into the car, where Alexander sat waiting. He didn't speak right away. He simply reached for my hand, steady and warm, as though he had been holding that gesture back for years. At the Hayes estate that evening, his grandmother called us into the sitting room. Her frail hands trembled as she handed Alexander an old letter. The paper yellowed, the ink faded. "This was written decades ago," she whispered, "by a young doctor who saved my life after a car accident." Her name was written at the bottom, "My Carter." My breath caught. That was my mother. I clutched the letter, my eyes burning. The woman who had taught me resilience was bound to his family long before I had met him. The grandmother smiled through her tears. "Perhaps fate is not cruel, Emily. Perhaps it was preparing this union long before either of you knew." That night, Alexander came to me in the garden, the moonlight silver against his face. He held a folder in one hand, the contract that had tied us together. Without hesitation, he tore it page by page, the sound sharp in the quiet night. "No more clauses, no more conditions. If you stay, it won't be because of duty, but because you choose to." His words cut through me, not like the cold demands of before, but like a promise trembling on the edge of belief. I felt the fear rise again, the memory of Jason's betrayal, of Rachel's venom, of nights spent in loneliness. But Alexander stepped closer, his voice softer now. "I can't undo what others did to you. I can only ask for the chance to do better." His hand reached for mine, not forcing, not claiming, only waiting. For the first time, I didn't pull away. Months passed, and the clinic I had dreamed of became real. A modest building bearing my mother's name, its halls filled with children whose hearts beat stronger because we cared. Alexander never tried to take it from me. He simply stood beside me, supporting quietly, never overshadowing. 1 year later, we stood in a garden draped in flowers, not under chandeliers or cameras, but beneath the open sky. Patients, neighbors, colleagues, those who once doubted, now gathered to witness. As I walked toward him, the whispers of the past faded. He smiled, not as a CEO, but as a man who had chosen me. And this time, I walked willingly, not into a contract, but into a life I could finally call my own. If you believe in second chances, in rising from the ashes of betrayal, then let this story remind you it is never too late to rewrite the ending. Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your voice is the heartbeat that keeps these stories alive.